This is KCCK's Culture Crawl. I'm Dennis Green, and my guest today is Steve Grismore of the band Big Fun, as we have a short little series of conversations about Jazz Under the Stars 2019, and Grizz's Big Fun is the opening band for this season's concerts in Norridge Park. Steve, welcome. Great to see you.
Good to see you, Dennis.
So are we, we kind of adopted, and I'm trying, the band's name is Big Fun, but I think it was Summer of the Arts that started calling it Grizz's Big Fun.
I don't know.
Because I think they wanted everybody to know that you were involved because it was a jazz festival, and we kind of sort of adopted that too.
That's okay. Yeah, it's just it was hard finding a name. Actually, John didn't really like that name because somebody else's. There are lots of Big Fun groups out there, and so creating a Facebook page, it's kind of a tricky thing.
Sure.
So we're like Big Fun Iowa if you go on Facebook. So it's not as simple as just having. But it's the idea of the group is that it's actually, in a funny way, it goes back to the Miles Davis album Big Fun, and this group plays a lot of fusion jazz, and that's a little bit of a connection there as well. There's a little bit of an impetus.
Well, I do know that when you first started the group, for the first, 4 or 5 months, that we would bump into each other and you would say, and I've got this great soul fusion jazz group, and it was obvious that you didn't know what to call it quite yet.
We didn't really have it. It took a while to kind of get there, yeah.
And you mentioned John, and that's John Shultz, who is the keyboardist for the band. Of course, a close friend of yours. You guys played together for decades, and a friend of
Clear
ours
back to the
too.
Mo band and before, probably.
Yeah, he passed away in 2018,
about a year ago.
We still miss him a lot, but glad that the band has continued to play out and perform. And in fact, John's family is going to be kind of a part of our event at Jazz Under the Stars because your performance kind of dedicated to his memory.
That would be a great thing to do. So I'm glad we're doing that.
So tell me a little bit about you. You said, fusion and soul jazz. Let's start with who's in the band.
Okay, well, so it's a 6-piece group, 4-piece rhythm section. It's got Danny Oline on bass, Tim Crumley on drums. Mike Conrad is now our official keyboard player, but
Mike is not available on the first.
Mike is not available, so Bob Washut will be there.
Gee, if only you could find a good substitute
pianist. Yeah, if I could find
pianist.
somebody good.
Yeah,
but, well, next time. Sorry about that. And of course, yours truly on guitar. And then on horns, we have saxophone and trombone. Now, that in and of itself is kind of a fun combination that kind of sets up a slightly different thing. And one of my favorite fusion groups of all time were the Jazz Crusaders. And they were tenor and trombone. There's no trumpet or alto. So there's a certain kind of sound that you get with that group. Now,
I had forgotten about the Jazz Crusaders because I'd always kind of wondered why it was that you ended up with, and we should say it's Chris Merz on sax.
And Anthony Williams on trombone, yes. And those guys are great. And it could be, we could always add another horn if we really, we can arrange this music to do what we want. But that's just where it landed. And it's just been fun. And we're doing music by, for instance, we're doing a version of Watermelon Man by Fred Wesley. It's an arrangement, so coming kind of out of the James Brown vibe and horn section, that groove, and really it's about the grooves. And then we're doing some Herbie, we're doing some Eddie Harris, the Freedom Jazz Dance, but the funky groovy versions. A lot of this music's come out of the late 60s and early 70s. And it's kind of an odd thing. I have to laugh. I've fallen into this weird trap historically. I'm such an old fart now that I have a rock band that plays music from the same time period.
Exactly.
And I don't know what I'm doing to myself, but
we're talking about the Beaker Brothers.
The Beaker Brothers,
of course. But isn't it kind of funny how the older we get, you try hard, you spend your whole you spend your whole life trying to stay really current and on top of all the new stuff, and then you do kind of get to a point where you just want to relax and do the things that you remember.
Yeah, and this band, and no pun on the name Big Fun, but it is Big Fun, and the idea behind it too, also what I've learned over the years, and of course relationship with Jazz Fest and all the things that you've helped do and create, it's sometimes, and I love playing avant-garde, crazy, weird stuff. I mean, you've heard me do that.
I have.
And I do that with different groups, but when it comes to like festivals, and events like Jazz Under the Stars, a lot of times, it's fun to have music that kind of rocks a little bit, that makes people happy and they move to it. And so it becomes a little more what I call it's a little better festival band. It's good for that. It has that
appeals to a wider range.
It appeals
of the spectrum.
to a wider. Yeah, that's all. It's not super, heady music, but gosh, the guys played great and it's fun.
Well, and it's not like it's not good jazz. I
No,
mean,
it's
great
good
jazz,
stuff.
Yeah.
We found a little space for that. I'm still working on some new tunes we're going to bring into the fold. There's all, you keep studying the history of that music and keep digging up some cool stuff. But,
So think back to this place in time in jazz, and it's a time, and maybe it's because we're of a similar vintage, but this was the time when I remember that there was a lot of cross-pollination between jazz and soul and rock and roll in a way that really doesn't happen quite so much anymore. Is that the way you remember it too?
Well, so just an interesting story. You may not know this about me. I graduated high school in '74, but I was in a band. I played rock and roll in high school, but I also did high school jazz band. But the band I had when I was in high school, even though it was a rock band, it was a horn band.
Okay.
And so we had trumpet and sax as well as the rhythm section and all that. But all the guys were jazz influenced. And it's kind of like if you go back, I just watched a great documentary on Terry Kath, the guitarist for Chicago. And where they came from was a very jazz-oriented thing. A lot of those guys came out of DePaul University. There was this connection, and there was this very experimental, let's improvise, but they turned it into this thing.
Right, but that very first, Chicago Transit Authority album was very close to jazz.
Yeah, and Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and all those groups. So that all has a tie, I think, interestingly for me, at that time period, being in bands with horns was cool. And even if it was rock, you could have horns. So good point.
And of course, a lot of these bands, they would hire jazz horn players. That's where the good horn players were.
Absolutely.
So
even a little later on, when you got into Sting and some of the stuff that came in the late '70s and early '80s, is
Steely Dan hires Wayne Shorter.
All those guys.
Yeah.
I mean, there you go.
So you mentioned Eddie Harris. You mentioned Herbie Hancock. And you also said that you're looking at maybe adding a few things. So I want to drop any hints about new things we might hear.
Yeah, I got another Crusaders tune I want to add. Another cool tune is "Sing Me Softly the Blues." I didn't realize that's a Carla Bley thing.
Oh, wow.
That came out in about '73.
Okay.
And Steve, and it's a really cool, and the group actually had Steve Gadd on drums.
Okay.
And so you listen to that song, and it starts out with this piano intro thing, and it goes through, and then it's this funky, groovy thing that just
he was a part of that. He was a part of that same scene, that Crusaders, and
and then Tom Scott, and all those guys. So I don't have a zillion things. Plus, I got an original I'd like to bring into the band. So there's always different stuff that we're experimenting with. We don't rehearse a ton, but we've gotten finally now off the ground, and we're playing enough gigs that we've got a nice repertoire. Plus, we're trying to have all of our stuff memorized and ready to go. So we've got a couple sets ready for the gig.
Come early to the concert at 6:30. We're going to have a high school ensemble, which consists of students from it's Vivian Shanley and Grant LaPointe, who are well known to us. We've been having them do stuff since they were in middle school. They're from Cedar Rapids, Washington, and then they got hooked up at All-State Jazz this year with some students from Cedar Falls. And so then they've been, kind of putting a little thing together. It's kind of a funny story. They got together, they went for dinner after Jazz All-State at the Cheesecake Factory. And so the band is called the Cheesecake Experiment.
There you go.
So they're going to do a short set ahead of you guys. First time we've ever had a chance to put a student band on ahead of Jazz Under the Stars, so that's going to be a lot of fun as well.
Well, and I think that's a great kind of continuation of the idea we've always had with whether it was the United Jazz Ensemble at the Jazz Fest, trying to bring kids. Now it's expanded out to have the corridor bands and include more people, which is great. Are you going to bring in I know there's a group of kids in Iowa City that also have a combo, and they're like a mixed bag from the
Corridor Quintet, and they are going to be with us on the 15th.
Okay, there you go.
So we've got we got Cheesecake Experiment, then we've got Clown Tooth, which is a group of recent alums out of Marion High School and that area. And then the Corridor Quintet, which, again, is Vivian Shanley on the bass, and then some students from City and West High rounding out the rest of the ensemble. We had them at our Taste of Jazz, and they just lit the place up.
Yeah, they're good.
Is Anna one of your is she one of your students?
She's one of
Anna
my
Cook,
students.
the guitar player? Yeah, she's great.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's really wonderful. I think that's great stuff. So.
Well, and of course, we've been talking a little bit about the Jazz Festival. For those, most everybody listening and watching, I would think, know that you were the founding director of the Iowa City Jazz Festival and have continued to be involved for years and years. And it was you who did things like put the United Jazz Ensemble, consisting of students from the Iowa City High Schools, on the stage. Yeah. And that's something, not only is that grown in the Jazz Festival, but now they perform at the Friday Night Concert Series, and we added the North Corridor Ensemble, and it just...
I think that's great. I really do. I mean, that is going to be the survival of any of this if we've got to keep the kids interested. Another interesting phenomenon, I don't know if we have much time you want to do here, but...
Oh, we got all the time in the world.
Well, the other almost weird thing, and I'm curious about it, is it's some of the kids that have gone to Iowa, and UNI for that matter, and there's some in Des Moines too. What's starting to happen is some of the kids aren't leaving.
Right.
And whether it's people like just some of the younger, like Tanner Taylor, for instance, in Des Moines, or Nolan Schrader up in Cedar Falls, and then you got Blake Shaw in Iowa City, and those guys, and Chris, the drummer, and then like Jim Bunig just finished his PhD, and
he moved back.
He moved back, and now he's living in Iowa City again, and it's just the whole. It seems like there's some kind of a jazz magnet thing going on right now and I don't know if it's always good if they stick around. I would encourage a lot of the kids to get out of here for a while, and some do. Jarrett Purdy's going down to Kansas City with Ryan Smith, but they come back and play gigs, and it's not that far away.
Well, they stay connected.
Yeah, they stay connected.
And sometimes, sometimes they do. It's good. It's good to have them. It's good to have young players here because that keeps our scene more vibrant, and I think it's very important for young musicians to see other young musicians on the stage.
Well,
I mean, as good looking as you and I are,
what are you going to do with that?
They don't need to see us. See people like us. All
the
time.
It's funny, I laugh. Blake Shaw plays up at the Clinton Street Social Club a lot in Iowa City, and if you've ever been there, which I know you have. And you probably have too, but it's got this stairway, and I've kind of
narrow stairway,
and then now they're on the third floor. They moved it up another, and I'm kind of like, nah. If they put in an elevator, I might consider it, but I'm not hauling my gear up there.
Yeah,
I'm going for elevators in one level. I like the mill and the sanctuary. That works fine for me. But it is great.
But to finish my thought, it's great to have students see young players, performing and enjoying themselves and making a career here locally, but it's also great when they go someplace else and be with new people and learn new stuff and then bring that to us too. So it's really the best of all possible worlds.
It's good stuff.
So it's big fun. August 1st.
Come hang out with us,
Knoll Ridge Park. It's the first Jazz Under the Stars. The Cheesecake Experiment will be on as well. We'll have all the usual stuff. We've got great food. We've got refreshments. The brand new band shell that the city of Cedar Rapids has is
that
very nice.
There's a new band shell there.
Well, it's the one that we bought a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And it's it's very nice. It's a very good piece of equipment. So
great.
Got Wired Production's going to come and do our sound as always. Ed Carr will be there to record the concert, and we'll rebroadcast it later. Of course, you can listen on the air if you can't be there. I think you should be there. But if you can't, listen on the radio.
So we're going to have good weather? What have you guys called?
And I have ordered good weather.
All right, great.
I have ordered great weather.
I appreciate that.
Steve, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Dennis.
Really looking forward to a great show.
Thank you very much. Yep. Bye-bye.
You can hear the Culture Crawl most Thursdays and Fridays and other times during the week, too, at 10:20 on the radio on KCCK, or download, watch, or listen to the podcast using the podcast app of your choice or at kcck.org. I'm Dennis Green.